The twilight sun spanned the tiny home with the walls painted in cozy gold and orange tones. Laura got up, carefully in front of her mirror, disappearing from her blouse. After a lengthy day, she let out a sigh, her reflection not only her fatigue but the silence, the loneliness that had accompanied her. Too long, she had consistently been elegant with a tenderness to her beauty that followed years of silence, sacrifices. However, tonight she sensed the burden of her isolation more than ever. She believed she was the only person in the house. She grabbed for something, lost in her own world. A new dress. Then the door abruptly opened with a squeak. Her heart leaped when she abruptly turned, holding the cloth to her chest. In the doorway was Daniel, her son. His shocked eyes became wide, and for a second they both froze, captured in a. Neither of them knew how to keep quiet. Take a break. Laura gasped. Daniel, what are you doing? Her voice wavered, but she made an effort to sound serene. He stumbled. I'm sorry, Mom. His voice rattled but profound. I assumed you were someone I didn't know. We're in the lower level. He began to retreat, but something. Laura paused at the emotion on his face. Wasn't merely humiliation. There was. He had another look in his eyes. Something weighty, unclear, and unsaid. Laura's chest constricted. She desired to dismiss it, act as though it never occurred, but the face persisted in her thoughts even after. Daniel quickly left the room. Regarding the remainder of the night, the house felt distinct. Every sound, every look. A strange new thing was carried between them. Thus, during supper, Daniel was remarkably silent. He did not look into her eyes, but when her eyes did briefly touch mine, nearly remorseful, nearly yearning, Laura compelled herself to maintain the light discussion, discussing work, regarding food and little details that typically filled the quiet. However, her heart was beneath her serene smile, racing. Later that evening, while she was sitting on the Laura kept thinking about that couch. Pause in front of the mirror. She made an effort to inform. For her, it was nothing more than a miscommunication, merely an incident. However, she knew in her heart that it wasn't that easy. She noticed a difference, a shift. Couldn't disregard. As Daniel entered through the living room with a drink of water, their gazes locked once more. This time, neither of them swiftly averted their eyes. Sufficient. Laura's heart began to warm up. Daniel's hand shuddered and his cheeks a little when he placed the glass on the table. He said, "Are you okay, Mom?" Very delicate, nearly too gentle. Her throat felt dry, but she nodded. "I'm fine," she said in a whisper. There was a pause between them. Something unsaid fills the room. Laura could hear a slight ticking sound coming from the timepiece, sensed her own beating, reverberating throughout her chest. She desired to talk, to let him know they should forget it, but she refused to move her lips. Rather, Daniel's eyes lingered, soft, looking and incredibly near. Something that is prohibited. Laura sensed her tilt of the globe as though she were standing atop the brink of something she was afraid of. Name. And during that precarious time she noticed that everything was already different. Laura averted her gaze immediately, her hands firmly folded in her lap. He was able to not support her with the weight of his gaze. No longer. It was too abrupt, too much, too risky. You ought to purchase some. Relax, she replied in a shaky voice but firm. Daniel paused as though he wanted to elaborate, but after that he just gave a nod. The tone of his voice was, "Good night, Mom." Low, weighty, and full of hidden significance. When he vanished into his chamber, Laura lay back on the sofa and closed her gaze. She touched her with a hand, chest, attempting to quiet the inside raging. She recalled, she was a mother herself. In any case, he was her son. She believed that what she saw in his eyes had to exist only in her mind. But her heart betrayed her. It had to be. Her thumping more quickly every time she recreated the expression on his face when he opened the door to the bedroom. No longer a child's look. Daniel wasn't longer the young boy she had once cradled in her arms. He had grown into a towering, robust, and possessing a level of maturity that She was surprised. It was difficult to fall asleep. That evening, Laura woke up and gazed at the ceiling, taking in the gentle noises coming from the house. It reflected on the years she had spent raising him. He's been by himself since his father left. It reflected on how he had consistently been protective of her, by her side at all times. When life became too burdensome, maybe that intimacy had produced something she possessed. I never wanted to see. She busied herself the following morning in the kitchen, acting as though everything was typical. She hummed as she prepared breakfast. The quiet, but her palms trembled when a plate was set in front of him by her. "Thank you," Daniel mumbled, but her gaze lingered in a manner that made her heartbeat quickens. "Daniel," at last she said, making herself look him in the eye. "Let's talk about last night." He froze. "Just forget it." "All right." Then put his fork down. His mouth constricted and he briefly glanced, as though he were going to argue, but he only slowly nodded, but his eyes conveyed a different tale. "That's what you desire," she gasped. What caused the pain? To listen to him say it in that manner? Why did it feel as though something was being lost despite? When did she realize that this was best for her? As the day continued, however, the air between they never cleared. Every little instant, his hand's movement against hers, the manner in which he reached for a cup, stood too near in the corridor, sensed accused of a serious offense. Laura determined that night that she needed room. She informed Daniel that she would be "I'm taking a walk because I need some fresh air." In actuality, she required separation from him, even for a single hour. It was chilly at night and the streets silent. She strolled slowly, thinking. Her heart was heavy, divided between denial and the weird pull from which she was unable to break free. She was aware that feeling this at all was improper. Bewilderment, but emotions did not follow regulations. They broke her by rising without invitation. Meticulously constructed walls. Upon her eventual return home, the home was dark, with only the faint glow from the lamp in the living room is on. She took a seat. Hoping to find Daniel, she put down her luggage. He was waiting in his room, though, on the sofa. The moment she took a step inside, he got to his feet. His expression was. His eyes were filled with something serious. Her knees became weak as a result. "Mom," he said, whispered. "We can't act like that." Something happened, but nothing happened. Laura's breath caught as she paused in the doorway, lodged in her throat. "Mom," he said, silently. "We cannot act as though nothing is wrong. Occurred as a result of something happening." Laura's. Her hands gripped her bag strap more tightly. Her entire body went motionless as, even though the air itself had changed, more substantial. "Daniel." Her voice trembled as she whispered. "Don't say that. You're not understanding what you're discussing." However, Daniel moved in closer, his gaze never straying hers. He insisted, "I do understand," his tone stable, albeit with irregular breathing. "I understand how I felt the night before, and I believe you also felt it." Laura's chest. It seemed as if his words were tugging at something that was deep within her. She gave her a shake head, but her tone faltered as she attempted to respond. "You don't understand. You're young and your mommy is me. We are unable to." What she said. Her throat constricted as she faltered. For a lengthy period of time, the quiet between them felt intolerable. Daniel's face softened and he stepped back as though hesitant to push her too hard. "I don't desire to harm you," he said. "However, I no longer able to deceive myself." I felt this for an extended period of time. Laura turned away, putting one hand over her mouth. She was unable to hide her tears from him. She assured herself that he was simply lost. Emotionally overwhelmed, he didn't completely comprehend. But she was betrayed by her heart. Once more repeating what he said as if they were the secrets she kept from herself. Finally she responded, "Daniel, you can't." Her voice was delicate and low. "We are unable to leave down this street. Individuals wouldn't recognize. I wouldn't pardon myself." He remained silent for a long time. "If," he whispered softly, "I don't give a damn about I only care about you, people think. The words were like a dagger piercing her. It desired to yell at him, to command him to put an end to this before it is destroyed. Stop. Both of them. However, she stood. Her heart was frozen, her breath was erratic. The sound of a drum beating. She stayed away from him that evening. She secured, sitting on her bed in her room, and gazed at the wall's shadows. It repeatedly reminded herself that she was more powerful than this, that she needed to sketch a line which she couldn't let feeling intensify. However, after she shut her eyes, his face was all she could see. The unvarnished sincerity in his eyes as he stated. He was all that mattered to him. When morning arrived, however, the weight remained heavy. Breakfast they hardly talked. Daniel's. It was not the typical silence. It was the sort with a storm beneath it. Laura acted as though she was reading the newspaper, even though the words were hazy in her mind. By the afternoon she was no longer able to accept it. She discovered him seated outside, gazing off into the horizon from the porch, with an appearance out of step with his age. She simply observed him for a moment, her heart. She didn't want her feelings to twist, to mention. At last she said, Daniel, her voice piercing the quiet. He turned and his eyes were hurting. Almost broke her. He would want me to. Slowly he said, stop. Then let me know you have different feelings. Simply utter the words, and I will never again mention it. Laura opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. But she made an effort to construct the words that would put an end to this, which would drive him away, for the benefit of both of them. However, her throat shut and she remained silent. Betrayed her. Daniel stepped out onto the porch, closer, looking into her eyes with frantic optimism. You can't say it, can you? He said. Whispered. Laura trembled, her breath. Her hand shook. The reality she had long suppressed was looking her in the face now. Additionally, prior to, she had the ability to stop herself. Her eyes gleamed with tears. Daniel was breathless at seeing her. He had already witnessed his mother sobbing, but never in this manner. These weren't depressing tears. By itself, they had another item with them, something that made his bones tremble. He reached out and said, Mom, but to reassure her, Laura took a step, swiftly returning, cleaning her face with hands that are shaking. No, Daniel, she responded, don't, in a stern but weak all at once. This isn't. Yes, we must not allow this feeling to continue. Ruin us, but it's not killing me. Daniel gave a solid response, his voice. It's the only thing stronger than hers. I can tell you feel it because it feels real. Why do you fear it so much? Laura's heart pounded and her chest heaved. With her back to him, she gazed at. Outside the porch is a peaceful garden. Considering that I am your mother, she said. I nearly choked on the words. And because there would never be forgiveness in this world. They would call it shameful and incorrect. That's not something I could handle. Daniel's footsteps approached. However, we don't. We've always just ever lived for the globe. Have we not had each other? He said, now softer, dispelling the rage, and pointing to the boy she used to know. You gave me everything, yet you reared me alone. And perhaps that's why I'm seeing you. Not in the same way as my mother, but... Laura screamed out as someone I stopped, abruptly looking him in the eyes, filled with pain. Please don't say it. Don't make this more difficult, Daniel. Paused in the middle of a sentence, his chest rising, and he collapsed, his hands clutched, his lips pressed firmly at his sides, grouped as if restraining. He wanted to confess everything. When Laura saw him, her heart ached. Despite his youth, his eyes had such. It almost undid all the love and anguish. She longed to get hold of her, to console him like she had done when he was a kid. However, suddenly every tiny touch felt hazardous, as though a single instance of all of her barriers would be destroyed by weakness. The days that followed were occupied with. Laura hurled space and stillness, herself into cooking, cleaning, and anything occupying her hands and keeping her thoughts off of him. Daniel avoided looking at her, however, but she felt the burden of his presence. In the house, wherever he was at night. His words tormented her as she lay awake. The world is not worth living for. That phrase kept repeating in her head. conflicting with her values, her anxieties, and her desire. Her heart felt like it was at war. Despite her best efforts, she could not keep the truth to herself. He felt something. After being apart for days, one evening, Laura discovered him leaning in the kitchen, buried in meditation, leaning against the counter. Glanced up as she walked in, and their eyes met for the first time in days. Without looking away, she said, "Daniel," gently, her voice nearly shattering, "I require you to make me a pledge." His clenched jaw. "What? Feel? Find someone," she muttered. "Someone who can provide you with you deserve the future. Make me a promise that you'll, whatever this is, let it go." Daniel gazed at her for a while, his dark, inscrutable eyes. He shook his head at last. "I am unable to guarantee that after letting go of this entails letting you go." Breath faltered as quiet descended upon the space. The walls seemed to be encroaching on her and forcing her to the truth that she had made a great effort to. Daniel then took a step forward. His voice grew softer, nearly shattering. "You can continue acting as you want to. You are able to run. You are able to hide. However, the reality is still present. Don't you feel it too?" Laura's lips parted as she froze. Her ribs were hammered by her heart. Could no longer muster the courage to conceal it. Laura's mouth quivered, but no words were spoken. The reality had been written in her eyes, in her quiet, and in the rise and fall of her chest. With Daniel felt and saw it with every breath. Additionally, the air became heavier. "Deep to get out. Daniel." At last she whispered, her voice splintering like delicate glass. What are we doing to ourselves?" His face calmed, the raging tempest in his eyes fading. "Become something soft, painful." He remarked, "We're just being honest." Discreetly. "For the first time in our life, we're not concealing." The corners were blazing with tears. Laura looked into Laura's eyes. Away, but Daniel took a step toward, dropping his voice as if he were terrified of walls themselves would be overheard. "You don't need to express it. Already understand. I notice it each time you glance at me. You have the same sentiments." Laura put pressure on her, putting her hand to her chest as if to calm her heart pounded violently. For she had been resilient for years, constructing barriers surrounding herself, acting as though she was solely his mother, whose function was straightforward and unwavering. However, Daniel had expanded and life had evolved. Additionally, in her, she had let her emotions sink due of loneliness into a prohibited area. Her lack of response was the response he required. Daniel's lowering shoulders, pain and relief pouring over him all at once. He grabbed for her hand cautiously and gently, as if she was composed of brittle material. And Laura did not pull for the first time. Their hands were warm, touched, shuddering, and the outer world came to a halt. The night was calm in the house. The air was thick, and for a while it was only them poised on the brink of an object they were unable to identify. "How I can stop this is beyond me," Laura acknowledged in a murmur, her tears at last falling. "I can't, even though I know I should." Daniel's eyes met hers as he grasped her hand, gleaming with a blend of optimism and sadness. "Then don't. Mom will work everything out. We'll manage." His words made her heart ache. Words. She wished to have faith in him. Desired to have faith that love could triumph fear, condemnation, and the ruthless gaze of the entire world. However, as reality applied pressure to her ribcage, reminded her of all the repercussions that would come next, Laura was able to not get any rest. She stared as she lay in bed, looking at the ceiling, her thoughts divided between fear and yearning. Each and every sound of she was reminded of him by the mansion. Each watercourse, each time the floorboards shift. Upon closing her eyes, she noticed how he had gazed upon her, not as a youngster, but as a man who had selected her more than anything else. By shedding tears, the choice was obvious, or so she believed. She would put a stop to this. He would construct her barriers once more, even if it broke both their hearts. However, when she entered, prepared to say the words in the kitchen, she stopped. Daniel had already arrived, his his eyes restless, the bag on the table. She noticed it when she looked up at her. Immediately, he had decided on his own. I can't remain here in this state. No longer, he whispered quietly, his voice shattering. If you refuse to acknowledge what we are to one another, if you would prefer to keep acting, then I might have to leave. Laura's chest grew constricted. Go. Where would you go, Daniel? He said. Gulped forcefully, his eyes met hers. Anywhere. I simply know that I cannot continue to live in the same home, silently loving you while I keep getting pushed away by you. Her world, her legs giving out under her. Desired separation, but now the idea of losing him really was intolerable. Her voice trembled and her lips parted as the truth pressed against her. You won't lose yourself, he said. The only way you'll lose me is if you force me away, and I'm unwilling to leave. Unless you want me to, that is. Laura felt her heart hammer her ribs. She gazed into the same eyes that he had always known, but now, with a love so intense it frightened her. She had carried the burden for years. Weight of isolation bringing him up by himself. She pretended to be strong. However, she now, standing on the brink of something she owned, never anticipated. The opportunity to be noticed, to be desired and adored without measure. At last she said, I don't want you to go. Stated in a brittle yet confident voice. Daniel, please stay. Remain. Relief swept across his face and he drew her into his embrace. Laura shut her eyes, her head lying on his chest, hearing the quick rhythm of his heart. She did so for the first time in years. Didn't feel isolated. The external environment remained in place with all of its regulations and verdicts. However, within their modest house, a separate reality existed. It was brittle, risky and unpredictable. However, it was theirs. Laura was aware that the path ahead would not be simple. There would be inquiries. There would be dishonorable. There would be evenings. She would question whether or not she had made the correct decision. However, as Daniel cradled her, she became aware of something she had been, until today, I was frightened to admit. Love and everything. The risk was worth the impossibility of its shapes. Therefore, in spite of all the worries that she picked him because he haunted her. Although the house remained silent, their hearts weren't. A brand new tale has started, one that would bind them, put them to the test, and alter them permanently. The conclusion.